And I'll tell you, Washington with a Heisman Trophy leading candidate quarterback had this. And I'll tell you about some games I'll tell you about Rutgers and a struggle that Ohio State's had. But when we look at the end result, we're still looking at multiple point wins. We'll talk about like the last 2 weeks, I'll say, really have been Florida State's offense hasn't achieved it, but you're still talking about a 3-touchdown win against Pitt, and outside of a blown play, a two touchdown score against a rival. You're talking about 41 points against a Syracuse team that at that point hadn't done anything. That was, I think, had only had one loss. You're talking about a Wake Forest team that they put up numbers on. You're talking about a Duke team that, regardless of what people want to say, we talk about how the game actually flew. The only team that was beating Florida State in that game was Florida State. And when you look at the end result, and for what I look at football as a 4-quarter game, it's kind of like, have they regressed, or are they really dominating the schedule in which is in front of them? Because it's hard to cover. It's why my quote, good teams win, great teams cover. If it was easy to cover the spread every week, Ohio State would be covering the spread every week. Georgia would be covering the spread every week. Everybody else. And I think when we look at even the Power 5 wins, Florida State has more Power 5 wins than I think it was a Power 5 wins with with a winning record or something like that. Florida State has more than everybody who's ranked in front of them. I don't know if I just know this. Florida State has not played the game that is like a complete 4-quarter game. And to me, that could either be, oh my God, they're just lazy and we don't know when it's going to come. Or I would be coaching to be like, yo, whenever they decide to do this, it's going to be ugly for somebody's child in particular, possibly. So we'll see. I know this. There's only one team right now that could potentially be on the schedule. Well, technically two, that I don't really want no smoke with in the first round of the playoffs. I will say, I don't.
Are you seeing all that about the Florida State situation because of noise that you hear on social media disrespecting Florida State, or is it because of the playoff committee ranking?
But no, I don't really care. The playoff committee, I'm gonna be honest, I'm trying to be strategic with this playoff committee ranking. There's only one ranking that matters, and that's number one. And the only reason that matters is because the number one team gets to pick if they want to be in Pasadena or if they want to be in New Orleans. The only way we're getting number one, and I'm going to be honest with you, is if Georgia loses to Alabama. Because if Georgia goes undefeated, 2-time back-to-back national champion, you're the champ until you get dethroned, in my opinion. There's nothing that we can do to prove that we can unseed them. So I'm not even going to stress myself out. But if that happens, I don't want to be 4. I want to be 2 or 3, and I know Ohio State and Michigan have to play each other. So they're going to take care of that for us. I just want to be in the show. That's it. Now, if we get number one because Alabama upsets Georgia and we beat Louisville pretty impressively in the ACC championship, I know what that means. That means we got to play Alabama. And I learned my lesson about 5-6 years ago about talking trash about Alabama. I'm not talking trash about Alabama anymore. I learned, but it's really more so just about the naysayers and the noise that's said by everybody else. And I'm not really overly concerned about them. It bothers me that our fan base actually listens to other people that don't really know ball. Because I'm like, oh, well, y'all barely beat Duke by covering the spread. We barely, that's not barely beating somebody is not what it was. We beat the only teams we barely beat were Miami and Boston College.
And Clemson.
Well, Clemson, we weren't favored.
Well, but it's a team you barely beat.
Yeah, game. But we won it. I mean, we beat them. You're right. I'll give that too. But even then, we've been talking about this since the beginning of time. Right? We all said our schedule is in September. And people were expecting Florida State to come out 2-2 in September potentially, to where that's the only thing I don't like is how the narratives are changing. We went from Florida State's going to be 2-2 to Florida State goes undefeated in September. That LSU team isn't any good, even though they have one of the most prolific offenses that we'll probably remember. Putting up 701 American football yards is a lot on one team. And then Clemson, I will say Clemson is down, but Clemson's Clemson until we dethroned them. So, yeah.
The only thing I'll say about that, and then I'll let George and Chris cut loose, is that I hear this from every fan base. So I do hear all the other fan bases that are rivals of whatever fan base we're talking about, whatever team we're talking about, if it's Ohio State, if it's Michigan, talking about the playoff contenders, Alabama, Georgia, etc., Washington, Oregon. When those teams are brought up, everybody else seems to be saying, who did you play? We're not impressed. I hear that about everybody.
I think that's only an argument now because people have used it. And it's a dumb argument. Like, I just think you play to what your schedule is. And I think it comes down to my bad, George. It's an elitist mindset. Yeah. It's a mindset that everybody in the SEC is just means more, just a better overall conference when this year it's not. And then the Big Ten, Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan are. But when you look on the other side where Iowa's at, I think it's Iowa, then what everybody else, the next best team has 5 wins. Like, this might be the most paired. This year might be the most like close year that we've seen in college football in some time, and a lot of the age-old arguments are ridiculous at this point. Like, you look at what the people have. Like, I think Washington has done. I would be a hater if I said Washington hasn't beaten anybody. I'm just saying, if you're going to judge people, we have to judge them consistently. I think that's the biggest point.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and you talked about it a minute ago with the schedule, Florida State came out with, kind of how all these other teams, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, all these teams, all their games are at the end of November. And kind of like that's what you find out what they're all about. Florida State came out the gate with LSU, Clemson, a Boston College team that at the time looked like, they're going to be a 2 or 3 win team at the end of the year. Oh, well, now, they're already about a bowl team. They've got a great quarterback that puts up all this great offense. And so you look at the numbers, all the different stats, advanced metrics that people use. At the end of the month, Florida State's defense is 100 this in total yards, 60, 70 in advance this, and that's just because we played all our best offenses, not all of our best offenses, but we just came out the gate strong with these tough games. And I think you've seen as the years go along, so kind of like we've talked about, all those defensive metrics now, when you turn back and look, they're all top 30, a lot of top 10s, top 5s. James hit on it. We've got 5 wins over teams that are 6-4 or 5, 6-4 better winning teams out there, more than all the other teams we're up against. The narrative, what's just so damning is you have the out of conference play, and everybody in the country was settled that it's like Pac-12 is probably the best conference. The SEC is down, down, down. Man, the ACC all of a sudden looks strong. The Big Ten, of course, the one division is unreal as usual, and it's like nothing has happened since then, but a bunch of SEC teams have beat on each other, a bunch of ACC teams have beat on each other, vice versa, et cetera, et cetera. And now all the same old bias from the past 10, 15, 20 years has crept back up. And it's, SEC gets value for this, ACC gets value for that. But at the end of the day, good ball gets played everywhere in the nation. It's a lot of parity thanks to the transfer portal, but then again, not. You have the top 10 guys, probably the top 8 that literally you can sit here and talk about could possibly make the playoff and win the thing. Florida State, Oregon, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, like all those teams you could see going in there and doing it. And Florida State, they've got everything you need. They're right there, in position to make a run at the playoff just as much as anybody else. And I guess I kind of got off in left field. James, I think, hit all the points, but yeah, we're right there. We're ready to roll.
I don't have much to say on this one. Same narrative, different day. SEC biasism is always going to be here. Alabama could have 2 losses, and they're going to try to find a way to get them in. Period.
Well, To me, when it comes to conference rankings and trying to determine which conference is the best and how they rank, once they start playing their own teams within a conference, it's difficult, I'll say, to rank the conferences because they all play each other. They're all going 500. I know that for sure. Every conference is going to go 500 because they all just play each other. So everybody's going to win the game and lose the game. It's just a matter of determining each conference, how top heavy is it? What's the distribution of power within the conference? And what does that mean? And then determining these out of conference games that are mostly played in September, who won those games and did they matter? Unfortunately, most of the ones that get scheduled turn out because they were scheduled 10 years ago to be uneven matchups, like Washington going to Michigan State. Well, at one point in time, that would have been a hell of a game, but that's a horrible game. So you only have a few of those that actually turn out. Florida State, LSU, Texas, Alabama, and a couple other ones. And that's about it. And the rest of the games are between different conferences, but they're very uneven that you can't draw any conclusions from Tennessee beating Virginia. And I could go on and on and on because they're not like seeded matchups.
Yeah, there's no doubt, but Florida State still held LSU to their lowest total of the year. And it's like you watch the broadcast and they say, oh, LSU, boy, they're getting their greatest test of the year. They've seen nothing like this Bama defense. It's like, I don't know what Bama you've been watching all year, but it's like all of a sudden Bama plays some terrible defenses. And it's like the whole narrative is, and like James said, it can come back to bite you because Bama can be as good and turn out at the end of the year to be the best team in the nation. But at the end of the day, we saw FSU play that LSU offense, and they played them better. I mean, and Jaden Daniels went down and missed how much of the fourth quarter? A tie?
How's that? Hold them to 24, right?
No. Florida State held them to 24. I think they got 28 on Alabama, and that was without Jaden Daniels for the fourth quarter. Plus, I mean, and really, Florida State held them to 17. They scored a garbage time touchdown with like a minute and 15 seconds left. So, I mean, it wasn't crazy difference, but at the end of the day, it's like they get, the whole world. It's like, it's just the inherent bias that exists. It's, a bunch of PR done from SEC commissioners that the ACC hasn't done. And that's part of the reason you want to get out.
This is the reason why I hate this conversation. Everything about it is all that I consider and talk all the crap about Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia that I want to. It's not going to change the narrative of anyone's minds of those that are in those teams or those conferences. I believe that Florida State fans are the only fan base, and I could be wrong, but what I know, we are the only fan base that hates our conference. We don't care if anyone else in our conference does well. We don't want you to do well. But I see even when it's Auburn, Alabama, I'll watch Auburn SEC. They'll say it over and over again. And they'll continue to write it. And I'm like, it doesn't help you because a team is going to win it out of your – that doesn't do anything for you. Yes, it does. It makes your school more money. You're going to be televised more because everyone thinks that conference is now the best because that's the team that won it 4 years in a row. The evening out of all of this is Florida State had an ugly win against Boston College. I'm not ever going to call the win against Clemson ugly because that team does not lose at home. But Alabama had one of the ugliest losses of the century against USF. But nobody wants to talk about that one no more. Look at Milroe on a roll. LSU was a great team until they lost to us. They were a top 5 preseason team. They lose to us. They're garbage. Anytime an ACC team beats an SEC team, there's always, they're not as good as we thought they were. That's the narrative that gets put out on ESPN anyway.
So Florida State's at 4 in the official rankings. Where would each of you have Florida State ranked?
Who wants to start it off? Look, I'll start it off. I like your poll. It's hard when you look at it. If you go on the eye test, you want to put UGA 1, Michigan 2, Florida State 3, Ohio State 4 is how I look at it. But under your, parameters, I'd probably have to go number 1, Ohio State, and you have to have a serious consideration for FSU 2, and then UGA and Michigan. Just going purely on resume, in my opinion.
Well, you don't need to use I'm just asking where you would rank just based on your own criteria.
Yeah. I think, 3 or 4 is totally fine for what Florida State's been at. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I would probably have an argument if they dropped us to 5, but at the end of the day, you've got 5 conferences, 5 undefeated teams. You've got a Big 12 as a 1 loss, but 5 undefeated teams that are all at the top of their conference. Ohio State and Michigan played last week. I don't think anybody could really be too upset about any way you want to place those 5th. It's just a argument about resume and bias that you could go on. But, as to your way, I like, Ohio State has proven it. They've got the victories out there. But with UGA picking up the Ole Miss, and they're starting to put one together too. It's harder and harder to turn them down. What UGA and Michigan look like. They look the part. They go out there and they're blowing people off the ball on the field. It's just a shame we have to wait till the last week to see that matchup. But yeah, I'd have Florida State 3 or 4.
Oh man, all right. Georgia.
Oh,
On to me.
I guess it's up to you, Chris.
You had Ohio State 1, so I'm going to do it this way.
I don't have them
you.
1.
Yeah, not you.
Okay.
Mine would be Georgia, Ohio State, Florida State, no Michigan, Washington. I do not believe Michigan has a better resume than Washington right now. Nowhere. It's just I don't.
Fair argument for sure.
Dang it, that's what I was going. That's actually exactly where I was.
Try to give you the opportunity to go first.
Yeah, it's really. I believe rankings should be, even the college football playoff, should be based upon if the season was going to end today. And one of the people who I think do it the best is, technically he's stealing, but he still does it. Bud Elliott does the Las Vegas odds of who's going to make the college football playoff. And he just posted. It's not his writing. It's just literally this is what Vegas says. Even though Vegas, I believe, has Michigan with higher odds than Ohio State, I would just say Ohio State, based upon who they beat, I feel will win that game. So that's why I would put them there, and I think that will put Michigan outside of the top 4. In Washington, because I don't think they'll beat. I think they're going to go undefeated based upon they've already beat Oregon, and that's what I think they'll see I believe that's what they'll see in the Pac-12 championship. So I think. And I'm going to make them 4 because I don't want to see Georgia right now. So I'm going to make Georgia play because it's my poll. I'm going to make Georgia play Washington and Florida State line up and play Ohio State. And I think that'd be good.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah, I admittedly may have some bias against Washington, them being all the way out there out west. It's like no matter what they do, I guess that's something I have to improve myself on. I just don't believe it. I don't believe the defense is going to stop one of these offenses out here. But we will find out.